Pokemon doesn't understand DLC. Good DLC should aim to give the player more content that the player enjoys. Wow, thank you for restating the obvious. But if it was so obvious, then why does this suck, relatively? You look at games with actual good DLC, Shovel Knight, Smash, The Last of Us, and while it may not be apparent from the surface, they all try to achieve the same goal. And when we take a different perspective and think about what these games are actually trying to do with their DLC, this goal should be obvious. Giving gamers more of what they responded positively to in the base game. Which, while it should be a no-brainer, a lot of game companies don't act on this, often creating new DLC from aspects of the game that weren't even responded well to. Again, we go back to the previously mentioned games. You enjoyed the gameplay of Shovel Knight? Well then here's an entirely new game with the same charm as the original. You guys want more reps from your favorite games? Here, we signed contracts with a bunch of third parties to give you what you want. For the most part. The story was the strongest part of The Last of Us, and you want more? Well then here's more of high-quality story mode gameplay. Studios recognize what the fans like, so here's more of that. Making DLC content extremely similar to what was looked down upon in the base game doesn't make sense. It's not good for the company putting it out, and it's not good for the players. Which really then begs the question, why? Why is this what we got? If this is what makes good DLC, then after all the negative and constructive criticism that Pokemon received about Galar and the Wild Area, it baffles me as to why Pokemon made two DLC that fall within extreme resemblance to the Wild Area. They don't understand DLC. If their goal was to create more content based off of what players actually enjoyed, then creating two new wild areas that feel extremely similar to the original was not optimal. Giving players more content that they didn't enjoy just doesn't make sense. And disclaimer, I'm not saying that I hated the wild area, it's a good step in the right direction. My main complaint is how they took the wild area and made DLC based off of it with little improvement at all. It just shows how out of touch they really are with their player base. Now, remember how I just said how good DLC should create more of what was positively responded to? Well, I was wrong. Well, not completely wrong, more in the sense that I didn't explain everything yet. Good DLC can also come from negative parts of the base game as well. If the idea was great, but it was simply executed improperly, then polishing those aspects of the game could create amazing DLC. DLC not only gives the players another go at the game, but it also gives the developers a take-two at parts of the game that were underwhelming in the final product. Pokemon's been using this concept for years, creating a revamped version of the game a year later, fixing some of the bugs and annoying aspects of the game that the developers simply glanced over in the original. So new DLC for Galar is the perfect opportunity to take advantage of this. They received plenty of criticism on how to improve their game. And yes, while they did make minor adjustments from the wild area to the DLC that did make the area feel more lively and the place feel more dynamic, these positive adjustments were still overshadowed by the glaring downfalls that remained consistent in the DLC that should have been changed. Not making the render distance further, Pokemon popping in and out was a pretty big issue that pretty much everyone brought up because of how noticeable and immersion breaking it was. Not allowing players to move around the wild area smoothly. Keeping players in these restricted routes takes away that adventurous feel that they were trying to accomplish with this wild area. It feels so natural to just hop over this ledge or slide down this cliff into the water that restricting the player from doing so really hurts the entire experience. Not changing the weird weather changes, like where on earth do you go where it's sunny to raining to whatever this is in like 15 seconds? It's another immersion breaking aspect and honestly a really simple fix that wasn't even worked on. And unfortunately, these are just some of the most glaring issues that remain consistent in the base game and DLC. Good DLC can come from creating more of what the player liked and polishing aspects of gameplay that were disenchanting in the original. Yet, Game Freak essentially failed in accomplishing either of these. And I know that some of you are sitting there and you enjoyed the wild area and felt like it was the strongest part of the game. And honestly, I actually enjoyed the wild area in the beginning. Like most people though, I noticed its flaws starting to bleed as time went on, and my initial indulgence that I felt because of the garnered hype encompassing the wild area started to fade, allowing me to really see the apparent problems in the wild area that should have been fixed in the DLC. Even if you believe that it was the strongest part of the game, that still doesn't excuse the fact that the blatant issues in the base game should have been fixed for the DLC. Now, this essentially leads me to believe one of two things. First, like I've been breaking down, Pokemon simply doesn't understand what makes good DLC. Or it's that the DLC was simply rushed out way too fast. Pokemon is a giant company, and with that comes corporate greed, leading Sword and Shield to be pushed out far earlier than it should have been. And unfortunately, this seems to be the case with the DLC as well. Pokemon Sword and Shield's trailer presented the game as an expansive open-world Pokemon game, a feel similar to that of Breath of the Wild. It was hyped up immensely and received a lot of positive feedback. Hell, even I had extremely high hopes for it. People were expecting this amazing world to explore, one as grand of that as Breath of the Wild. It's because of this early hype that Pokemon most likely decided to start development of the DLC with the idea that it would be similar to that of the wild area. Like I said earlier, DLC is often created from the most positive aspects of the base game. It makes sense, players like this part, give them more of it. However, if this DLC was in the works before the game even came out, then there was no feedback to analyze other than social media hype. The hype of the wild area even lasted during the release of the game, assuring them that making more of the wild area was the right move. The only problem being, as the hype washed away, the flaws started to become ever more apparent. But by the time people started to make complaints against the wild area, the DLC was already done. November 15th, 2019 was when Pokemon Sword and Shield was released, and only 4 months later, on March 26th, 2020, was the DLC announced. Meaning that within 4 months, a whole new world with new Pokemon, new animation, a new DLC story, battles, and a whole lot more was created. No, this doesn't make sense. And it's because it really doesn't make any sense. According to gaming news outlet Nintendo Everything, speaking to IGN, the Pokemon Company's Elvin Glee confirmed that the Isle of Armor expansion started development before Pokemon Sword and Shield released. Perhaps that isn't terribly surprising since it's only been half a year. The major flaws that were pointed out in the wild area were only partially touched upon or were completely looked over with the release of the DLC. Considering the lack of needed improvements to the DLC, it's obvious that the DLC was created before the main game was even put out. And in terms of the second DLC, we can assume that insufficient time was given as well. Sword and Shield honestly felt like an incomplete game, so purposely leaving out content because they know they can make money off of it later isn't unsurprising. In fact, this technique is practiced so frequently with large gaming companies that it's hardly even news that Pokemon would stoop to this level of scum. The DLC didn't have the parts of what make a good DLC because they didn't have the reference or time to make it that way. So, does Game Freak understand DLC, or is it the fault of greedy higher-ups wanting to push out the games as fast as possible? And honestly, I think it's both. The wild area was a selling point of the game, and while it was heavily criticized, creating DLC based around that concept wasn't a terrible choice. However, not fixing the glaring issues that the player base pointed out to Pokemon is a big red flag. DLC gives the developers a chance to make something even better with the feedback they received. Yet, the wild area was still underwhelming, and the largest flaws remain consistent. However, this isn't completely the fault of the developers, as the first DLC was created before the game was even created, and we can pretty much assume that the second DLC wasn't given sufficient time either. It seriously seems like the DLC was just forced out early while there's still hype around the game so that they could sell more DLC, as giving a game time to really become something special is a process. A process that, in Pokemon's mind, loses money. And that's what I really think this all comes down to. Even if Game Freak doesn't understand what makes DLC good, as long as they put something out with the Pokemon name on it, it's going to sell, leading to games being put out based upon when the timing is best, rather than when the game is complete. let's just hope that the Gen 4 remakes and the Arceus game make up for this. Hey guys, I really hope you enjoyed. This was one of the most draining videos I've ever made, hence the long wait time. Sorry about that. Anyways, I really do hope you liked the video, and if you stuck all the way until the end, I'd really appreciate a like and sub. It helps a lot. But anyways, with that, I will see you next week, hopefully, and yeah, that's it. Bye.